The wind clawed at her threadbare coat, a bitter midwife to the raw pain in her side. Each gust was a physical blow, stealing the thin warmth gathered close to her bones. The snow lay thick, unforgiving, muffling the world into a silent, white tomb. She stumbled, the icy crust breaking beneath her weight, plunging her leg into a drift. A gasp escaped her lips, a thin plume of white against the gray twilight sky. Fear was a constant companion now, a cold knot in her gut, a frantic beat against her ribs. It had been weeks, maybe months, since she'd seen a friendly face, since she'd heard a kind word. The journey had stripped her of everything but the desperate, primal need to keep moving, to put distance between herself and the life she'd fled. Freedom, she had called it. But this stark, brutal wilderness felt less like freedom and more like a slow, agonizing end. Every shadow held a threat, every sound the snap of a twig, the distant howl of a wolf sent shivers of terror through her. She was alone, injured, and the last vestiges of her strength were ebbing away like melting snow under a harsh sun. She thought of the faces she'd left behind, not the cruel ones, but the few, fleeting moments of something softer, something she had buried deep within herself, believing it had died long ago. A tear froze on her cheek. This was not the freedom she had dreamed of. It was merely a different kind of cage, one built of ice and desolation. But then, through the swirling snow, she saw it. Faint yellowish light. Hope was a dangerous thing, a fragile vine easily trampled, but it flickered in her weary eyes. She pushed herself forward, one painful step after another, drawn by the promise of warmth, of shelter, of a temporary reprieve from the relentless cold and her own crushing despair. The light grew steadier, revealing the dark shape of a small cabin, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear battling desperation. Who would be out here so far from anywhere? Would they help? Or would they turn her away? Or worse? She paused, hidden by the dense pines, watching. The cabin was small, rough-hewn, blending into the unforgiving landscape as if it had grown from the earth itself.
No dogs barked.
No voices carried on the wind. Hesitantly, she moved forward, her legs heavy, her lungs burning. She reached the cabin door, a thick slab of wood scarred by weather. For a long moment, she hesitated, her hand trembling as it reached for the latch. This was the precipice. Step over it and her life would change, for better or for worse. Summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed, born of sheer survival instinct, she pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with the smell of burning pine and something else, something earthy and clean. It hit her like a physical force, chasing away the biting cold that had permeated her bones. A man stood by the stone hearth, silhouetted against the dancing flames. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet stillness about him that was both unsettling and strangely reassuring. He turned slowly, his eyes, dark and steady, meeting hers across the small space. They held no immediate judgment, no quick anger, only a deep, quiet assessment. He was a stranger, an unknown quantity, yet in the face of the storm outside and the exhaustion within, he represented a sliver of safety. She couldn't speak, her throat tight with cold and fear. She simply stood there, a ragged, shivering apparition in the doorway, snow melting into puddles around her worn boots. He didn't ask who she was, or where she came from. He didn't ask why she was alone in the wilderness in the dead of winter, bruised and bleeding. His gaze dropped to her injured leg, then back to her face. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes softened, just slightly, like the thawing of a frozen creek. He simply gestured towards a rough-hewn chair near the fire. "Come in," he said, his voice low and quiet, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You'll freeze out there." It wasn't an invitation. It was a simple statement of fact, devoid of warmth yet offering the very thing she craved. She didn't hesitate this time. She stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her, sealing her in with this silent, solitary man. The cabin was sparsely furnished: a table, 2 chairs, a bunk against one wall, shelves lined with simple supplies. Everything was neat, orderly, speaking of a man used to living alone, beholden to no one. He moved with a quiet competence, fetching water, a clean cloth, and a small bottle of something that smelled faintly of pine. He knelt before her, his hands large and rough but surprisingly gentle as he examined her leg. She flinched initially, expecting pain, expecting indifference, perhaps even cruelty. But he worked carefully, cleaning the wound, binding it with strips of clean linen. He didn't probe, didn't pry, his silence a welcome balm after the relentless questions she'd faced in her past. He simply did what needed to be done. He offered her a tin mug of hot tea, brewed with herbs she didn't recognize. The warmth seeped into her hands, then down into her stomach, chasing away some of the deep-seated cold. She watched him over the rim of the mug, trying to decipher the man who had offered her refuge without a single question. His face was weathered, lined by sun and wind, his eyes watchful. He was a man of the land, used to its harshness, perhaps molded by it into his quiet, resilient form. He asked her name, not demanding it, but as if it were a simple courtesy. "Alara," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He nodded, accepting the name without comment. He didn't offer his own, and she didn't ask. Names felt like burdens, like ties to a past she was desperate to escape. For now, she was simply Alara, a woman found broken on his doorstep, and he was the quiet man who had taken her in. Days bled into weeks in the quiet rhythm of the ranch. Alara's physical wounds began to heal, the bruising fading, the cut on her leg closing. But the deeper wounds, etched into her spirit by fear and hardship, were slower to mend. She spent her days observing the man she now knew only as the rancher. His name remained unspoken, a quiet understanding between them that some things were best left unsaid. He worked from dawn till dusk, tending to the few horses, the small herd of cattle, repairing fences, chopping wood. He was a man of few words, his communication often limited to curt instructions or observations about the weather or the needs of the animals. Yet, in his actions, she saw a quiet integrity, a deep connection to the land and the creatures in his care. He was hard, yes, molded by the unforgiving life he led, but not cruel. He shared his meager provisions without complaint, ensured she had warm blankets at night, and always left the door unbolted when he went out, a silent acknowledgement of her need for freedom, even within his walls. She began to help, first with small tasks, sweeping the cabin floor, washing the few dishes, mending tears in his rough clothing. He accepted her help with a nod, never demanding it, but seeming to appreciate the quiet companionship it brought. As she grew stronger, she ventured outside, helping him with the chores that didn't strain her leg. She learned to feed the chickens, gather eggs, brush down the horses. The work was hard, callousing her hands, aching her muscles, but it was honest work, work that grounded her, pulling her back from the abyss of fear and despair. She watched him with the animals, how he spoke to the horses in a low, soothing tone, how he handled the calves with unexpected gentleness. It was a side of him rarely seen in his interactions with her, which remained mostly silent and watchful. Yet, sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him observing her, his dark eyes resting on her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not pity, not judgment, something akin to curiosity, perhaps even concern. The silence between them was no longer just an absence of words. It was becoming a language of its own, filled with shared glances, small gestures, the rhythm of their movements in the cabin or the barn. She learned to anticipate his needs, bringing him water when he worked by the forge, handing him tools before he asked. He, in turn, seemed to anticipate hers, leaving a warm shawl by the door on particularly cold mornings, ensuring the fire was always burning when she rose. The ranch was a harsh, isolated place, a pocket of quiet existence far from the world that had broken her. Here, the judgments of others seemed to fade, replaced by the simple, fundamental needs of survival and the quiet companionship of another solitary soul. She still woke sometimes in a cold sweat, haunted by shadows from her past, the fear of familiar ache in her chest. But the cabin, the ranch, the quiet presence of the rancher, was slowly, tentatively, becoming a sanctuary. It wasn't the freedom she had sought in fleeing, but it was a different kind of liberation, the freedom from constant fear, the freedom to simply exist, to heal, to breathe. One crisp afternoon, as Alara was helping the rancher mend a section of fence near the edge of the property, he paused, his hammer still, his head tilted slightly, listening. The wind carried the sound of approaching horses, more than one, and not moving with the familiar gait of local ranchers. Attention stiffened his broad back. "Trouble," he stated, his voice low and flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of a man who knew trouble when he heard it. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. Her past, the thing she had fled with such desperation, suddenly felt terrifyingly close. Who could it be? Had they tracked her? Had they finally found her? The sanctuary, the fragile sense of safety she had begun to build, threatened to shatter. The rancher turned to her, his dark eyes scanning her face, reading the fear etched there. There was no accusation, no demand for an explanation, only that quiet, steady assessment she had come to recognize. "Get back to the cabin," he said, his tone firm. "Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me." His protectiveness was clear, an unspoken promise in his eyes. It wasn't just the quiet man who had offered her shelter standing before her. It was a man who, through shared time and silent understanding, had come to see her as something worth defending. But fleeing wasn't an option anymore. Not just for her sake, but for his. He had given her refuge when she had nothing, and she couldn't abandon him to face whatever threat her past represented alone. She shook her head, her voice trembling but resolute.
No.
"I can't. They might be looking for me." It was the most she had revealed about her past, a painful, hesitant confession. He didn't press for details. His gaze held hers for a moment, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her decision, of her newfound resolve. "All right," he said, turning back towards the approaching riders. "Then stay low, and do exactly as I say." They moved quickly, silently, back towards the cabin. He grabbed a rifle from inside, checking the action with practiced ease. His movements were economical, efficient, the movements of a man prepared. He positioned himself near a window, hidden from view, the rifle resting against the frame. Alara stood slightly behind him, her hands clenched, her breath catching in her throat. The sound of the horses grew louder, closer, until they could hear voices rough, unfamiliar, demanding. The riders pulled up outside the cabin. Heavy boots crunched on the snow. A loud, insistent knocking echoed through the small space. "Hey, anyone in there? Open up." The voice was harsh, authoritative. Alara tensed, her muscles coiled, ready to run, to hide, to fight. But the rancher remained still, a rock of calm in the storm of her fear. The knocking came again, louder this time, rattling the door on its hinges. "We know you're in there. We're looking for someone. Seen a woman come this way." The voice was impatient now, edged with threat. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This was it. Her past had finally caught up to her, threatening not only her precarious freedom but also the quiet existence of the man who had saved her. She wanted to shrink back, to disappear, but the rancher's steady presence beside her held her grounded. He didn't move, didn't speak, his gaze fixed on the window, the rifle held ready. A different voice called out now, colder, more menacing. "We know you've been hiding someone, friend." There's a price on her head. A chilling finality settled over Alara. The price. The reason she'd fled. The rancher turned his head slightly, glancing at her. His expression was grim, but his eyes held no fear, only a steely determination. It was a silent question. "Confirm it?" Alara met his gaze, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of defiance. She wouldn't be bought and sold again. Not ever. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He understood. With a slow, deliberate motion, the rancher opened the cabin door just wide enough to speak through the gap, the rifle barrel visible in his hand. "Nobody here but me," he said, his voice still quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight, a warning. "And I ain't seen hide nor hair of anyone," a gruff laugh from outside. "You expect us to believe that, old man? Step aside. We're coming in." The rancher didn't budge. "You got no business here," he stated. "This is private land. Turn around." The air crackled with tension. Alara held her breath, her eyes fixed on the gap in the door. There was a brief silence, heavy with unspoken threats. Then, the sound of a foot kicking the door violently. The wood groaned, but held. "Last chance. We can make this easy, or we can make it hard." Before the rancher could respond, Alara stepped forward, moving into his view from the doorway. Her voice was stronger than she expected, clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Leave him alone," she called out. "He has nothing to do with this. I'm the one you want." A surprised silence from outside. Then, the man's voice, laced with triumph. "Well, looky here. The little bird flown right to us. Come on out, girl. No point in hiding anymore." The rancher tensed, his hand tightening on the rifle. Alara laid a hand on his arm, a silent plea. He hesitated, then gave a curt nod, acknowledging her decision, her courage. She stepped fully into the doorway, facing the riders. They were rough-looking men, faces hard, eyes greedy. They saw not a woman, but a bounty. "I'll go with you," Alara said, her voice firm. "If you swear to leave this rancher out of it." "He gave me nothing, knew nothing," the leader sneered. "Sure, we'll believe that. Get your hands where I can see 'em." But as he spoke, the rancher moved, faster than Alara had seen him move before. He stepped out beside her, the rifle raised. His stance was wide, rooted, unwavering. He wasn't just protecting his land. He was standing with her. "She goes nowhere with you," he said, his quiet voice now holding the authority of bedrock. "And you'll leave this ranch." There was no more room for negotiation. The leader raised his own weapon, but before he could fire, a shot rang out. Not from the rancher's rifle, but from the edge of the woods where Alara and the rancher had been mending fence. One of the riders cried out, clutching his arm. Distracted, the others swiveled their heads. In that split second, the rancher acted. His rifle barked twice. 2 riders fell. The others, startled and outmaneuvered, realizing they were exposed and facing an unexpected defense, turned their horses and galloped away, disappearing back into the trees as quickly as they had arrived. Silence fell, broken only by the whimpering of the injured men and the sound of Alara's shaky breath. The rancher stood, rifle still ready, watching the tree line until he was sure they were gone. Then he lowered the weapon. He turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. But in his dark eyes, she saw it, a flicker of respect, of shared victory, of something deeper than simple protection. The confrontation was over, the immediate threat dispersed. But the real battle, the one for her future, for her sense of self, felt won right here, standing beside this quiet man who had unknowingly helped her find her own strength. He looked at the injured men on the ground. "Can't leave him to freeze," he said, his pragmatism cutting through the tension. He didn't need her help, his competence was clear, but as he moved to deal with the situation, Alara didn't hesitate. She followed, ready to assist, no longer a fugitive hiding from the world, but a woman finding her place in it. Here, on this isolated ranch, beside this stoic man. She had come seeking freedom from a past that had sought to bind her, but she had found something unexpected, something more profound than mere escape. Freedom was not just the absence of chains. It was the presence of safety, of respect, of quiet, unwavering support. It was finding a place where she was seen, not for the price on her head, but for the resilience in her spirit. It was in the silent trust of a man who had opened his home and his life to a stranger. The rancher hadn't asked for her story, but he had given her a new one. He had given her not just hope, but the solid ground beneath her feet on which to build a future. And standing here, on the cold, windswept prairie, she knew she wasn't just free. She was home.